I want to talk about a friend of mine. I mean, we have buddies every day. We're not on the phone all the time, but we've shared a lot of things together over the years. The two of us, worked for a company variously known as Crosley, Avco, and Multimedia over the years. We were working, doing talk variety shows, and he was inventing a new kind of show. I was doing an old-fashioned show in Columbus. He was working here in Dayton. And Avco had this event for all of its performers at the Ohio State Fair in Columbus. And they called it the Avco Hour of Stars. And there would be the wonderful performers of Avco, Paul Dixon and Bob Braun, and earlier on Ruth Lyons, and many others. And they were doing wonderful things. They would do monologues that were funny and interesting. They would sing. They would play pianos. They would dance. The musicians would perform, and people would come from miles to go see them. And among the Avco Hour of Stars, two lonely folks who couldn't do anything. They had their own shows in Dayton and in Columbus, sat in a green room, and Phil Donahue looked over at me and said, "Nick, what in the hell are we doing here?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "Well, we're supposed to go out there, and what am I going to do, interview somebody in the middle of the stage with 15,000 people looking?" And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Well, God knows you can't sing." I said, "Well, there is that." I said, but he and I went out and did whatever we did. And while we did that, there was something else that Phil was working on that we didn't know. Phil, as it turns out, was wrong when he told me that he couldn't do anything. As a matter of fact, he was creating out of whole cloth, right before my eyes, a brand new form of television. The rest of us were clinging to a format that was a cut flower in a vase on his way toward extinction. Phil was doing something. He was doing something important and very successful because he was doing the right thing. He looked at that landscape of television, and he was looking at the largely female audience available in the daytime. And what Phil did was gave them respect. And because he gave them respect, they listened and they watched. They responded by giving him a 29-year run that stands as the longest in television history. I don't know how many interviews he did. Some say 7,000 or 8,000. I'm sure it was more than that. Those historic space bridge telecasts with the Soviet Union, I remember those. 20 Emmy Awards, the George Foster Peabody Award. These are important, you know, and not because he's got his mantle loaded, but because he was creating something new and was being recognized for it, and therefore all of us were, as we changed toward him. The Academy of Television's Hall of Fame headlined so many specials. Donahue and Kids, Ryan White talks. God, those are wonderful stuff. He produced and co-directed something called Body of War. I hope many of you saw it, an anti-war documentary told through the journey of a 24-year-old wounded Iraq War veteran. That was named the best documentary by the National Board of Review of that year. It was just one of many. Oh yeah, he's opinion columns, sure. New York Times, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times. Fired by MSNBC. We heard about that, didn't we, earlier today? Yep. When he looked at me and said, "We can't do anything," I guess he wasn't talking about himself. I guess Phil could do something after all. Phil Donahue.
great man. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. Oh, there you are. I used to be able to see. Well, thank you, Nick. I'd like several copies of your introduction. I can't come to Dayton without thinking about Irma Bombeck, who lived across the street from me in Centerville, Ohio. This arena reminded me again of her. It was in St. Louis where I ran around a theater not unlike this one, a venue with several balconies, and Irma's on the stage looking about this big. And a woman way up there stood and said, "Irma, I understand you were once Phil Donahue's neighbor. What's Phil Donahue really like?" And she said, "He peeks in windows." So, and by the way, she interviewed me for the Kettering Oakwood Times before she got her job at the Dayton Journal-Herald. May it rest in peace. Glenn Thompson gave her first big break of all things, a woman on the op-ed page of a newspaper. Thank you, Bob Shakochis, for your generous words about my brief unhappy life at MSNBC. I felt that America had become a warrior nation. We have something like 700 military installations around the world. We spend $2 billion a day on things that go boom. And as I, slow learner that I am, began to realize what was becoming of our nation, who should pop into my brain but Gloria Steinem? Gloria's message, which she has relentlessly offered here and around the world, is that there is no peace without gender equality. And I remember Bush, bring it on. That's rootin' tootin' shootin' West Texas Sheriff John Wayne machoism. That's about male superiority. That's about we know what's good for you. And then I began to realize that so much of the wonderful things that people said about me in airports. Thank you, Mr. Donahue, for your program. Because of your program, I got out of an abusive marriage. And I immediately knew that they saw Gloria on my show. That's why they're telling me this. And then I thought about my own upbringing. Notre Dame, 1957. Girls at Notre Dame were an impure thought. The nun who taught me in the third grade was not allowed on the altar during Mass, and I could serve Mass. So much of what Gloria brought to my attention made me finally start to grow up. And then I realized how really vulnerable women are all over the world. And the brutality that so many cultures inflict on women. There are cultures where literally women are dragged around by the hair. This is awful, and it's ubiquitous. Genital mutilation, foot binding, children sold into slavery, 14, 15-year-old marriages mandated. How vulnerable unaccompanied women are, not only around the world, but right here in good old free USA. And that journalism, of which she is such a noble part, is a male enterprise. Every major metropolitan newspaper in this country supported the invasion of Iraq. Over 4,000 Americans dead. Bring it on. Cheney said to Bush, "You going to take them out or not?" This is high school machoism. This is what you get when you don't have gender equality. Nobody's going to argue that women are not necessarily also capable of, but spontaneous violence and wars are the things of men. And by the way, you don't get a statue in a park for fixing welfare. You only get a statue in the park for war. That's why all those men are on those horses with the swords. Children play on cannons in parks. It has consumed this nation, and it is killing our young adult, draft age, war eligible adult children. And at the root of it is what Gloria has been banging the drum about for so many years now. And what I admire most about her is she keeps on keeping on. And by the way, the women's movement hasn't been a straight line. It's had its slows, its pushbacks. Some of its biggest detractors have been women. I remember a woman standing up in my audience with Gloria as the guest and saying, "I like it when my husband helps me open the pickle jar." And I looked at Gloria and I could see she was about to explode. But what great resolve she had. She held it in. And I know she wanted to say, but Gloria is too well raised. She wanted to say, "It's not about pickle jars, honey." And so many women who said, "I'm not a woman's liber but." And then I began to realize as the show went on through its 29 years on the air, that most of the young women, almost all of the young women in my audience throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s would not want to lead the lives of their mothers. A very interesting commentary on our culture and what's happened to us and how much the world has changed after my graduation in 1957 from the University of Notre Dame. The religion that likes virginly mothers and motherly virgins. The religion that has done so much to promote the second-class citizenship of women. And I count Gloria as my best teacher. And she has come now to the birthplace of my program where she first came in 1971. And all those women in the audience leaned forward. Here she comes, aviator glasses, long hair. Boy, they listened to everything she said, and I appreciated her power. It's been felt all over the world. I don't know anyone who's saved more lives. When someone comes up and says, "Thank you, Mr. Donahue, because of your show, I got out of an abusive marriage," I see Gloria's picture, and I see her responding to all those women in the audience who had been trapped because of early marriage, because of getting married too soon. It was Margaret Mead in this city who came. Margaret Mead did my program here. And she said, "We're an overmarried culture. Too many people get married too soon." What a pioneer she was. And that's not unlike the message that Gloria gently gave to all those young girls who came up to talk to her after a speech. She stayed and she answered every question, and she never left until the last young woman in awe came up to her. And some cried. Some were pregnant. Some had their boyfriends disappear. And Gloria was there for them. The energy that she's expended and the lives that she has saved are incalculable. And so it's my honor to introduce Marlo Thomas's best friend and the 2015 Dayton Literary Peace Prize awardee. I give you Gloria Marie Steinem. All right, kid. I'm here now, baby doll. Okay.
Oh, dearest Phil, I thank you for kindness, which may be the single most important human quality on earth. I thank you for your years and years and years of a television program that was a bonfire around which we told stories, as we have been doing for 100,000 years, that brought us together. And if it weren't for those two things, I wouldn't have let Marlo marry you. You know, how would you like to be the last speaker? It's so difficult to know what to say. First of all, we are all, I think, a little bit like Russian dolls. You know those Russian dolls with a little person and a more and more and more and more. So the youngest person inside of me is shocked to find myself here. The Toledo person inside me just can't believe it. This is fan-fucking-tastic, what is going on. And it's too much. I mean, okay, so here's the first thing I want to say. To everything that has been said so far, yes. I think this is the first time in my life I have been to an event, a large public event, in which I have agreed with every single word. So with Molly Bloom, I say yes, yes, and again yes. Right? That was a sexual reference, incidentally. It is really, really, really difficult to know what to say. And having said yes to everything so far, I'm just going to try to add a couple of things. One is that the level of violence against female human beings globally has risen to such a level that for the first time that we're aware of, there are fewer female human beings on spaceship Earth than there are males. And that is a result of everything we know, from sexualized violence in war zones, to female genital mutilation, to son preference, which has ended up in many countries with a son surplus and a daughter deficit. In this country, it's mainly domestic violence, which means that if you added up all of the Americans who were killed in 9/11, in 2 wars in Iraq, and in a war in Afghanistan, and then added up all the women who have been murdered by their husbands or boyfriends in this country since 9/11, more women have been murdered than American lives have been lost in all of those conflicts. And yet, of course, we pay more attention, as we should, but a lot more attention, to foreign terrorism than we do to domestic terrorism. And this is not to say that female life is any more important than male life. Absolutely not. But it is to point out that we now can prove what our instincts always told us, which is that violence against females is the first violence we are most likely to see in our lives, or dominance of females. And it tends to normalize the idea that some people are born to dominate and some people are born to be dominated. And after that, it is easier to fit in caste, to fit in class, to fit in race, because we come to believe that this is a birth-based, inevitable circumstance. Now, looking at all of the countries, all the major countries on Earth, we can demonstrate, as has been done in a very, very good book called Sex and World Peace, that the single most important influence, determinant of whether a country is violent in its own streets and whether it will be willing to use military violence against another country is not poverty, not access to natural resources, not religion, or even degree of democracy. It is violence against females. So what we must do, I think, is connect these things. We must understand that social justice movements are not in silos like this. They are all connected. Bella Abzug always said, yes, we need a Declaration of Independence, but then we need a Declaration of Interdependence. So we need to see that in order to maintain race or class or caste in the long term, we have to control women as the means of reproduction in the long term, to control women's bodies. These two things are intertwined. All these birth-based differences are intertwined. There's no way you can dig up one without also digging up the other. It is, it's one of the tragedies of our media and our outlook on life that we say things like, which is more important, sex or race? Or that in India, they say, talk about sex separate from caste. These things cannot persist in the long run without each other. They are completely intertwined. So I hope that even though social justice movements must name themselves first, that's very important for groups that have been invisible, and proceed in an autonomous way at first, that we are finally now understanding that they are all connected. Sometimes on campuses where I speak a lot, young people will say to me, why is it that the same groups are both against lesbians and birth control? This seems to them irrational. But it's not irrational, because the same forces that tell us that sexuality is only moral and okay when it is directed towards conception, right, are demonizing love between two women or two men, and also opposing family planning, contraception, safe and legal abortion, all of these things, right? It is intertwined. The anxiety about sex education, contraception, and so on now is increasing because in part because the country, in about 20 minutes, is no longer going to be a majority white or European American country. And so the same groups that are concerned about contraception, sex, who will sometimes just cheerfully say to you the white race is committing suicide, are also against immigration. These things, again, are inextricably intertwined. So I hope more and more we realize when we focus on one, we also must focus on them all. That it is in our self-interest, in our enlightened self-interest to do this. And I hope those of us who are white folks, what should we call ourselves? Beige, maybe? I don't know. Will understand that we are culturally deprived when we are isolated. We need to fight to get out of the ghetto. We go snowblind in most of our social contact. It wasn't until I lived in India for a couple of years and came home and looked around and saw that I was going snowblind, compared to the array of colors that I'd been used to seeing for 2 years, that I got mad on my own behalf. It isn't about doing something for someone else. It's about trying to be a whole person and have access to the whole panoply of humanity ourselves. It is a joyous fact that we are on the verge of becoming no longer a majority European American country. We will understand other countries much better. We will have much more glorious diversity, better food, better choices, better movies, better novels, right? We need to really, literally get mad on our own behalf and realize how important it is and how joyous it will be to have a country that looks more like the world. It is so important that the books and the literature that are recognized in this genius, creative, incredible event that has been organized by Sharon and by Mark, that they typify the reward of a diverse, a rich, and multitudinous country. And I thank you so much for that. That is so rare. I think there are some things that also women of every race can bring into this mix that we have that are especially valuable right now. It is not that women are any more moral than men, no. It is not that all women are alike, no. But it is true that in a kind of general way, we have been raised without our masculinity to prove. And this can actually make us pretty good peacemakers. So if we look at, say, Ireland and the long conflict, I mean, I thought it was like Israel, and I thought it was never going to end. I mean, it went on so long, there were plays about it, there were poems about it, it seemed hopeless, right? But it was brought to an end, the violence was brought to an end by Catholic and Protestant peace women who won the Nobel Prize for being peace women, and the violence came to an end. Think about Liberia. That was a country run by warlords and full of lethal violence, pretty much given up on by the rest of the world. But in fact, Christian and Muslim women organizing together at great danger to themselves over many years managed to expel the president, send him to the criminal court, have an election with the help of women in Ghana and other African countries who supported them and sheltered them, and bring about the end of violence and the beginning of democracy in Liberia. It is helpful to have female human beings, not all female human beings. Margaret Thatcher would have been a different case, right? She managed to go to war with an island I didn't even know they knew. But in a general kind of way, culturally speaking, it is, I think, very important to have women's voices as peacemakers. It is also important to consider reproductive freedom as a fundamental human right, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, for all of our fundamental freedoms. Because forcing women to have children, childhood marriages, all the patriarchal religions that disapprove of and restrict contraception, birth, which are very ancient arts, incidentally. Everybody, as long as human beings have been around, those arts have been understood, and they were only wiped out by patriarchal religions, by burning 6 million witches over 300 years because they understood how to practice contraception. I mean, it took a lot of doing to control reproduction and control women's bodies. But it's especially important that we do this now because it is the single greatest cause of global warming. The fact that the Earth is burdened with too many human beings is the single greatest cause. I was very heartened, and I bet we were all heartened, to hear the Pope speak about global warming. But advertently or otherwise, he is undermining his own goal by restricting the reproductive freedom of women in so many different countries, and that's true of other patriarchal religions. Whenever women can decide for ourselves when and whether to have children, the population rate settles down to just a little over replacement level. Some women have 6 children, some women have 2 or 3 children, some women have none, but in every case that has been recorded, it settles down to a little over replacement level. And that is so crucial for the future of this spaceship Earth that we love so much. So whether it is looking at immediate war and peace or looking at the long-term goal of environment, I think we must bring these causes together and understand that they are all connected. Now, I was trying to think of, because, we are here talking about problems, things we need to do together, things we need to solve. We must understand that everything we do matters, so we should behave as everything we do matters. So much has been said in these few days that is so very valuable, and it is all about action. It is all about understanding that change comes from the bottom up, not from the top down, and everything we do matters. But I thought I wanted to end on one positive thing, right? And so I was trying to think of, how do we know we're free? How do we know we're free? And here's my theory, and actually not unsupported, I would say, by a lot of research and into social change and what is free and what isn't. And that is that laughter is the only free emotion. It is the only emotion that can't be compelled. We all know that you can compel fear. You can also compel love if people are dependent and isolated for long enough. We come to believe we are in love with our captor. It is the Stockholm Syndrome. It happens to men as well as women. We enmesh with our captor. But Laughter cannot be compelled. It happens when two things come together and suddenly make a third. It happens when you learn something. It's kind of an orgasm of the mind. There it is, you just laugh. See? I think, that laughter is an ultimate proof of freedom. So I hope that we consider this, that we cultivate this, that we refuse to go any place where they won't let us laugh, especially religions. The old circular religions, unlike the patriarchal, hierarchical religions that won't let you laugh, the old religions all let you laugh. The Native American religions, the older religions in India, the Kway and the San in Africa, laughter is part of it. Laughter is part of it. So I hope that we will remember this and gauge this as a measure of our freedom. I think that the learning part, actually, the learning part of laughter was somewhat proven by Einstein, who always said that he had to be very careful while he was shaving, because if he had a new idea, he laughed and cut himself. And it's also proven by the ancient, old, and still ongoing Native American spiritualities of this country, who had a character called the trickster, at least in English, translated as the trickster, not like a jester who made the king laugh, no. A trickster who was the spirit of laughter and who was said to be a messenger from the unseen world, and that laughter was the bridge between the seen and the unseen world. So much so that it is said in Indian country that if you haven't laughed, you can't pray. So I hope we understand that in this great, great, great occasion here that has been so transforming for me, to be here to learn from my colleague authors, to learn from all of you here, to experience these few days that I will treasure always for the rest of my life, that we understand that we can cry, celebrate, learn, connect, empathize, organize, make change, get angry, give them hell. We can do all of these things, and if we laugh, we will especially know that we have allowed each other to be free at last. I don't know if I should say sweet Jesus. I have to think about that. But free at last. I thank you for a kind of reward I never, never, never could have imagined when I was sitting there in Toledo. I thank you for transforming my vision of Ohio, which to no fault of Ohio, but due to my situation, was not so good, right? And now is fan-fucking-tastic because of you. Thank you.